Hey, hi, hello. Okay, this is the last one for the evening, and this marriage has become scarier than a horror movie. I just love my crime shows. This is true crime, okay?
Hi everyone, my name is Jack, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In most cases, addiction is not a sentence, and many former alcoholics, for example, overcome their addiction, return to normal life, build families, and help others with similar problems to overcome the crisis. This is how the story of a young woman named Nicole Pitts began, who seemed to have a whole bright life ahead of her. The investigation in this difficult case lasted 6 years before the main suspect in the murder was in the dock, and another year it took to prove in court his guilt and send the criminal to prison for as long as possible. At first glance, this crime seemed perfectly planned and thought out down to the last detail, and the criminal himself for many years believed in his impunity and lived a full life, believing that he would never be brought to justice. But it was the little things and details, which the investigation for years collected in bits and pieces, helped to put the puzzle together. And now, let's try to make sense of this convoluted story from the beginning. Who is Nicole Pitts? Nicole Pitts was born in King County, Washington in 1973 on February 26th. She was the only common child of her parents, whose marriage broke up when the girl was still in high school. Nicole grew up an active and sociable child, played sports, and was considered a real charmer. She always had a lot of friends. She loved trips out of town to the countryside, and the favorite place of rest of the girl was Lake Sammamish, located east of Seattle, where she was every year during the summer vacations. After graduating from high school, the girl went to Western Washington College, where she studied public relations. In parallel, Nicole continued to actively participate in sports, was in excellent physical shape, and decided to turn her hobby into a source of profit. She got a job as a trainer at a local sports club, where she quickly gained the respect of her colleagues, and also gained regular clients who willingly attended her classes, where Nicole was an instructor. In parallel, Pitts decided to get higher education in the field of management, and after she got a job in a large mobile communications company. Outwardly, she was always friendly, sociable, and ready to help at any moment, but almost no one even guessed how much pain and misery was hidden behind a screen of apparent well-being. Harmful addiction. As a teenager, Nicole experienced a serious crisis when her parents divorced. For a fragile yet to the end of the unformed psyche, it was a great shock, and rebellious character and bad company turned out that Nicole began to hide from problems, pouring them with alcohol. All this led to a serious addiction that lasted several years and thoroughly undermined Nicole's physical and mental health. At that time, Nicole's mother Gail worked as a stewardess and was almost constantly absent from home because of her busy work schedule, so she did not notice in time that something wrong was happening to her only daughter. The girl lived with an elderly grandmother, who also did not immediately realize that her granddaughter regularly consumes alcohol. When the truth was revealed, alcohol addiction has already managed to do irreparable damage. To cope with the problem, Nicole was helped by her mother Gail, with whom they have always been very close, despite everything. She not only sent her daughter to therapy, but also attended AA meetings with her, helping her to open up and overcome her cravings for alcohol. By then, Gail had remarried, and her new boyfriend, Rod, was sympathetic. He supported her stepdaughter in every way possible, loved her like his own daughter, and believed that she could overcome her addiction. Nicole approached therapy responsibly, did not miss a single meeting, and quickly enough was able to overcome her addiction. However, as I said, alcohol took a toll on Nicole's health. She developed serious problems with her pancreas, so much so that she had to undergo surgery. But the worst thing, alcohol abuse at such a young age violated the reproductive functions of the body, so that Pitts could not have children. In the mid-90s, when Nicole overcame addiction and returned to a sober life, she met her future spouse, whose name was David. At that time, she just got a job at a sports club, and David was his regular visitor. A tall, handsome young man who carefully watched himself and did not miss any training, immediately liked Nicole. In turn, he also paid attention to the attractive coach and began to show interest in her. True, David was 4 years younger than Nicole, but the age difference did not embarrass them. Soon between them began a romantic relationship that lasted almost 8 years, and only in 2002 the couple married. They arranged a beautiful but modest wedding ceremony in Hawaii, to which were invited only the closest people to them. After the wedding, the newlyweds settled in the quiet town of Linwood, in Washington State, where they bought their own house and gradually settled down. Nicole was a very sociable and friendly young woman. She quickly made friends, and she also developed good relationships with all the neighbors. She simply adored animals and had several dogs. Since she could not have children, she gave all her unspent maternal love to her pets. According to neighbors' memories, David and Nicole looked like the perfect married couple. They were practically inseparable, often walking their dogs together and just glowing with happiness. Nicole loved to cook, and she was very good at it. She pampered a delicious home-cooked food spouse, and also liked to surprise the guests who came to their house with her culinary skills. In 2006, just a few days before her 33rd birthday, Nicole mysteriously disappeared. On that day, for the first time, she did not come to the meeting of the AA Society, where she was the leader and inspirer of the group. Since this had never happened before, the other members of the group thought she had snapped after almost 9 years of sobriety. Pitts also didn't show up for work that day, which worried her, and in the evening the alarm was sounded by Gail, who couldn't contact her daughter all day, which had never happened before. She called David to find out what had happened, but her son-in-law replied that he couldn't reach his spouse either. According to her husband, he and Nicole had had a bit of a fight the day before, so when he tried to call her the next day and she didn't answer the phone, he assumed that Nicole was still mad at him. It was for this reason that David didn't start looking for her right away, but waited until the evening to ask his wife for forgiveness. When in the evening Nicole did not come home and her phone was still unanswered, the family decided to go to the police, but there their application was not immediately accepted. The missing person was an adult, and not even a day had passed since her disappearance, so the police said that there was no cause for concern. For this reason, the search was not started until the evening of the second day, because Nicole never showed up and her phone was unavailable. The police decided to start the search from the place where Nicole was last seen, namely from her and David's house. However, no clues or anything unusual could be found there that would indicate that Pitts had been kidnapped or something had been done to her in that very room. In addition, Pitts was missing along with her personal automobile, which suggested that she had simply left and decided not to return. From here arose the first version, according to which the young woman, after a family quarrel with her husband, simply decided to leave him or teach him a lesson, making him worry. The second version was voiced by Nicole's friends from a support group for people with alcohol addiction.
No, they're okay
In their
now.
opinion, Nicole could have snapped
After this,
years of
okay?
abstinence and sobriety.
And we can watch our movie. We can bond and watch our movie. After this, yeah. This is short.
Nicole often exceeded her prescribed dosage and at some point may have switched from medication to alcohol. The third version was the worst of all possible options. Nicole did not return and did not give any news about herself because she was no longer alive. However, the family members
Lulu still didn't go down with you?
refused to believe.
No? I wonder why not. Well, I know I've been putting them in the crate. I know he got to move around.
With a request to help in the search and share any relevant information about the location of their daughter. They also took the first flight to Linwood, where they began searching for their daughter on their own, putting up flyers with her photos and asking people who knew her personally.
Down, so he went and got down.
But also for her car, while trying to establish which route it had traveled on that fateful day. But the longer the search lasted, the faster the hope of finding Nicole alive.
Send me the picture.
A few days later,
Yeah.
when one of the local park
Okay.
a man going for a morning jog came across the body of a young woman. That day, he decided to take a shortcut through an unpopular and neglected area rather than his usual route. There, he noticed something strange in the shrubbery, and coming closer, he realized that it was a badly mutilated naked female body. Information about the terrible find was immediately transferred to the police, and the criminalists who arrived on the scene suggested that the crime may have involved violence, because the body of a young woman had no clothes. There was no doubt that it was a murder, and judging by the number of bruises, abrasions, and bruises, the victim had been severely beaten beforehand.
Damn.
The cause of death was
God,
asphyxiation.
don't tell me that husband
Nicole
did
was
it.
strangled with her bare hands. It was a truly gruesome picture. As the car of the victim was still not found, investigators assumed that the main motive of the crime was theft. But the attacker decided to eliminate a witness, and since it was a young woman, she may also have been abused. The police immediately assumed that the body found belonged to Nicole Pitts, who had disappeared a few days ago and was being searched for all over the city, but she had yet to be identified by her family. When Gail saw her daughter's body in the morgue, she lost her senses. The mother needed medical help. Her husband, Rod, was also out of grief, but the reaction of the widowed spouse, many seemed a little strange. David did not look depressed at all, and his emotions were somewhat faked. However, then no one paid much attention to it, because everyone experiences tragedy in his own way. While the search for the vehicle was underway, the police still believed that the car was the main target of the attacker, and the traces of the killer should be sought inside the car. Information about the missing car was placed in the media with a request to
Go on. Come on, Eddie. Come on.
The car was found only a couple of weeks later in one of the parking lots of the city. The unremarkable gray Volkswagen Polo was noticed by the guard on duty because the car had not been taken away for a long time, but the guard had no idea that it was involved in a murder case. The police immediately took the car for detailed examination and necessary expertise. It was assumed that it was here that they would be able to find evidence and important clues that would help to trace the criminal, as well as to restore the picture of the crime. However, the investigators were completely disappointed. In the car could not be found exactly nothing. There was no blood, traces of struggle, or signs that the car owner was taken somewhere.
Not yours. Not yours.
Fingerprints and traces of DNA from Nicole herself, as well as her husband, who also occasionally used.
What did I say to you? I told you to sit down. Okay, you're going into praise.
The irrefutable fact remained only that the young woman was killed with particular cruelty.
Why do I have to
threaten
threaten
you?
The
crime was completely unclear. The hijacking version now seemed untenable because the car was abandoned almost immediately on the other side of the city, and there were no signs of struggle inside it. The second obvious motive was violence, but this assumption was not confirmed. Experts found that the deceased, at least a day before the crime, had no sexual contacts, neither voluntary nor forced. But in this case, the question remained open as to why she had no clothes on. The third version was some personal motive, or acute, unpleasant feelings of the perpetrator towards the victim. In favor of this assumption spoke numerous injuries, inflicted as if in a fit of rage. However, the kind and sociable Nicole, eager to help everyone around her, had no enemies or ill-wishers. This difficult case had all chances to remain unsolved, because after almost a year, the investigation has no new leads or directions for the search for the criminal. No one saw the code and who abandoned the car in the parking lot, because the place itself was not crowded, and there were no surveillance cameras in the area. But what was strange was that the person driving the car was much taller and larger than the victim, as evidenced by the position of the driver's seat. Suspicious was also the fact that the case was assigned the status of secrecy, and information about the course of the investigation, as well as about new facts and found evidence, was not disclosed even to the relatives of the victim. That is, the mother, stepfather, and husband, in fact, were in the dark. They received only fragmentary information, for example, that Nicole's bank card was used at a certain gas station in the country after her disappearance. The police requested the footage from the video cameras there, but what they saw on them remained a mystery. Nicole's parents, despairing that there were no results and their daughter's killer was still at large, decided to conduct an independent investigation on their own. To do this, they hired a private detective to gather all the information and verify some of their guesses, and announced a reward of $10,000 for those who provide any useful information on the subject. The reward was later increased to $35,000, but it still didn't help move the case forward. David only showed interest in the investigation for the first 6 months, but after that he gradually withdrew, stopped communicating with his mother-in-law and father-in-law, and soon remarried and had an heir. For Gail, this news was a heavy blow, because her daughter could not have children, and David constantly reproached his wife for this. The grief-stricken mother repeatedly suggested that the culprit could be her son-in-law, but many believed that in her speaks resentment, and the police seemed not to consider such a version at all. An unexpected twist in the case. It wasn't until 6 years after the crime that it was revealed that David had been taken into custody as the prime suspect in the case. For most people who followed the investigation, such a turn was a complete surprise, but not for Nicole's family and friends, who from the beginning suspected him and openly talked about it. During the long years of investigation, they seemed disappointed in justice, but now justice had been served. David himself, who by that time had changed his place of residence and stopped contact with his first wife's family, was discouraged when the handcuffs were snapped on his wrists because he thought that the case had long been closed and no one was looking for the criminal. He categorically denied his guilt and even agreed to take a lie detector test, which he failed miserably. As it turned out, the police also from the beginning suspected David, but no hard evidence proving his guilt. They had no. And to scare the criminal and make him hide, they did not want to. So all these years, the investigators were busy with the fact that the pieces of evidence to collect, so that the culprit was deserved punishment. David himself probably thought he had committed the perfect crime, and no one would ever get on his trail. However, the crime had a number of oddities, each of which had to be checked. Let's start, perhaps, with the surveillance footage at the same gas station, where someone paid with a card of the dead Nicole. The footage clearly showed that the card was used by a man who looked very much like David, but it was impossible to identify him clearly because of the presence of a headdress and dark glasses. Despite the fact that this recording could not be considered as incontrovertible evidence, it was still included in the case file.
It's a clue.
The second oddity was the absence of Nicole's wedding ring, without which she never left the house. At first, everyone thought that the jewelry was stolen by a criminal, but during the search in the victim's house, the ring was found in a box on the dressing table. In addition, experts criminalists, during the examination of the body, found in Nicole's mouth a special dental mouth guard, which she used during sleep to prevent bruxism, teeth grinding.
I grind my teeth.
Nicole had been prescribed this device shortly before the tragedy, because she was experiencing uncontrollable spasms of her masticatory muscles due to nervousness, which in turn led to the erosion of enamel and chipping of teeth. This finding led the investigation to believe that the victim had been killed in her own bed while she was still asleep. This explained the lack of clothing on her, and the fact that the body was completely clean, and there were no signs of resistance. There was also no trace of makeup on Nicole's face, which she always carefully applied before leaving the house. About the mouthguard, by the way, David could simply forget, because his wife began to use it recently. In addition, experts have studied in detail and assessed the position of the driver's seat in the found car, finding that the anthropometric data of the last person who sat behind the wheel coincide with the data of the spouse of the murdered. In addition, in the car, as already mentioned, found fingerprints only David and Nicole. If a third person had been in the cabin, there would have been found his traces, and if he erased them, then erased traces and prints of the owners of the car. And one more important discovery was made thanks to the rapid development of technology. The perpetrator, after his crime, in an attempt to confuse the investigation, several times used the victim's phone in different parts of the city, but in the same places, and at the same time there was a signal from David's phone. As it turned out, David also had a motive, and in this perfect-looking family, a serious crisis was long overdue. While Nicole was studying hard, working 2 jobs, and helping people cope with their addiction, her husband led an idle lifestyle. He never held down a job for long, liked to spend time in bars and clubs where he spent his wife's earnings on booze and other women. As a result, the family faced serious financial problems, which only worsened over time. Nicole tried to persuade her husband to take the mind, to give up partying, and start attending AA meetings, where he would help him cope with addiction. But in response, David only laughed, called his wife terribly boring and complex. It also turned out that David not only systematically cheated on his wife with various random mistresses, but also repeatedly offered her to join them. Nicole always responded with an emphatic refusal, and once her husband tried to get her drunk to force her to do it. Gail knew about all the horrors that were going on in her daughter's family, and tried to convince her to leave her husband, but she did not want to do it, because she loved him, and hoped that David would change. And after Nicole's mysterious death, her husband rushed to get a large insurance payment and immediately started a new affair. As it turned out, a few months before the tragedy, David, who had not been faithful before, had an affair with a girl named Jane. He spent time with her in bars and clubs, while his wife was busy working or studying. Shortly before Nicole's birthday, he brought his mistress straight home, where they were caught by the suddenly returned Nicole. It was this circumstance that became the cause of that very family quarrel. Nicole told her mother about the incident, with whom she was very close, and a couple of days later she mysteriously disappeared. Since Gail was aware of everything that was going on, she suspected her son-in-law from the beginning. However, the police insisted that the evidence gathered was too little to send the suspect to jail. Then the case was classified, and the family stopped receiving any information about the investigation. And over the years, the parents lost all hope that the culprit will be punished. By the way, when David received an impressive insurance payout after his wife's death, he spent that money with Jane. Gail suggested that David's mistress could be an accomplice or inspirer of the crime, but she was only brought in as a witness because no evidence proving her involvement was found during the investigation. David appeared before the court in September 2013, but he continued to categorically deny his involvement in the tragedy. His defense lawyers initially insisted that all the evidence against their client was circumstantial and could not unequivocally prove his guilt. When it became apparent that there were too many incriminating factors, the defense changed tactics, trying to make David look like a victim. The story of pain pills that Nicole took after her back injury was brought up, and the lawyers also tried to convince the court that Nicole snapped and started drinking alcohol again, making her husband's life unbearable. But first, such claims were baseless, and everyone who knew Nicole confirmed this. And secondly, even if she had snapped, it would not have given David any right to kill his wife, and even with such cruelty. The guilt of the defendant was eventually fully proven, and for his crime he received the maximum possible sentence provided by the laws of the state in which the case was heard. David went to prison for 18 years. However, in 2025, he can count on parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence. Thanks for watching.